J.P. Morgan was an incredibly wealthy and influential figure in U.S. history, owning the first billion-dollar company and having a major impact on the country's economy. He had the power to save or destroy companies with his decisions. His life exemplified the American dream. There will never be a man quite like him. Pierpont Morgan was raised in a wealthy family. His father, Spencer Morgan, was a successful banker who prioritized his son's education and future as a financier. Despite his privileged upbringing, John had several health issues, including severe coughing fits, migraines, seizures, and scarlet fever. As a result of his medical conditions, John was often unable to play outside with other children his age. During his childhood, John's health deteriorated further due to rheumatic fever, and his father decided to send him to live alone on the remote Azores Islands in the Atlantic Ocean to recover. He spent almost a year on the island, isolated from the rest of the world and his family. After his recovery, John resumed his education and studied in various places including Boston, Switzerland, and Germany. By the age of 19, he completed his studies and was ready to start working. Thanks to his father's connections, John landed a job on Wall Street at a banking firm that managed George Peabody & Co.'s interests in America. John's job at the banking firm included writing reports on America's financial and political landscape for his father's firm, a challenging task given the country's status as an emerging market at the time. John's father recognized his son's impulsive decision-making from a young age, and in 1859, John made a risky gamble by using his company's funds to purchase a shipment of Brazilian coffee without a buyer, which senior members of the banking house, including Johnson Faber, found appalling. At 24 years old, John left his job at an established firm to start his own company, eager to make his mark on the world. His rise started with his father's bank in England, where his new company worked as an agent, providing a strong foundation for his future success. After marrying Amelia Sturgis, she was diagnosed with tuberculosis. Joan tried to save her by taking her on a long honeymoon to the Mediterranean, but she passed away just 4 months after their wedding. Despite this tragedy, John worked tirelessly to establish his own empire. During the American Civil War, John paid $300 for a substitute to take his place in the draft. However, he still found ways to profit from the war. John displayed his shrewdness by purchasing 5,000 surplus Hall carbine rifles at $3.50 each, which were deemed too old for the government to use. After making some minor adjustments to the rifles, Morgan's Association sold them back to the government for $22 each, which was over a 600% increase in price. This was only the start of his controversial business practices. In 1871, John partnered with financier Anthony Drexel to create Drexel Morgan & Co., which eventually became J.P. Morgan & Co., which led to the emergence of present-day banking giant J.P. Morgan Chase. John acted as an intermediary initially, but later financed projects independently. John recognized the profitability of merging competing companies in the American railroad system, planning to consolidate them into a single entity for greater control and economic benefits. John used his investment in railroads to consolidate the industry, creating monopolies through his strategy of Morganization. He desired power and control, using his position on boards to manipulate leadership. Through consolidation, he achieved both power and stability in the industry. John acquired a significant portion of America's railway industry, which made up a large portion of the stock market's value. He achieved this through purchasing shares, underwriting $40 million in bond sales, and acquiring more rail lines. Eventually, he owned 1/3 of all roads in America, which accounted for 60% of America's stock market capitalization at the time. John became a prominent figure in the railroad industry and used his influence to shape the companies he invested in. Despite suffering from a disfigured nose, he demanded portraits be redone to make it look normal. He had an imposing presence, thanks to his aggressive way of speaking, startling facial features, and towering height. In 1901, John consolidated his Northern Pacific Railroad with 2 other railroads to create the Northern Securities Corporation, a massive holding company. He had engaged in monopolistic practices for years, with the support of President McKinley. But when Roosevelt became president after McKinley's assassination, he opposed John's actions and became his match. Roosevelt ordered the Justice Department to sue the Northern Securities Corporation for violating the Sherman Antitrust Act, but John refused to back down, leading to a tense court battle between the two. The company was eventually broken up, leading to a long feud. John made a snide remark about Roosevelt before embarking on a journey to Africa, but he was already making plans for something more ambitious. 931. The year was 1901, and Carnegie Steel was at the zenith of its power, dominating the steel industry and standing as one of the most valuable companies in the entire country. Despite the company netting a staggering $40 million annually, its founder, Andrew Carnegie, was ready to retire and sell his beloved company. The question was, who could possibly afford to purchase such an empire? That's when John approached Carnegie and offered to buy his company, telling him to name his price. Carnegie, perhaps sensing an opportunity, named an astronomical figure, $480 million. It would be the largest business deal in history, but John agreed without hesitation, later confessing that he would have paid $100 million more. The landmark purchased in 1901 was just the beginning of John's grand scheme. He didn't just stop at acquiring Carnegie Steel, but instead merged it with the Federal Steel Company and several other businesses to form U.S. Steel, the world's first billion-dollar corporation, with a market cap of $1.4 billion. To put that number into perspective, all manufacturing in the entire country was capitalized at a mere $9 billion. With this deal, John Hood controlled roughly 2/3 of the entire American steel production, an unprecedented feat. Steel and railroads were the two largest industries of the time, and John had seemingly conquered them both. But he wasn't content to rest on his laurels. John went on to finance Thomas Edison's early experiments with electricity and played a pivotal role in merging Edison Electric with its competitors to create General Electric. His influence was felt in almost every corner of the business world. John's talent for combining companies and turning them into unstoppable giants was unmatched. But a crisis awaited him. 11-3. In 1893, the U.S. suffered a severe economic depression marked by a sharp decline in stock prices, business closures, bankruptcies, and high unemployment rates. The crisis also led foreign investors to exchange American bonds for gold, depleting U.S. reserves further. During the Depression of 1893, the American dollar was tied to the gold standard with a reserve of at least $100 million worth of gold bullion. However, by 1895, the depletion of gold reserves caused a decline in the dollar's value, putting the U.S. at risk of defaulting on its loans. With no central bank to intervene, the American economy was on the brink of collapse. President Cleveland realized that selling more bonds wouldn't solve the economic crisis, so John met with him to present a plan. John collaborated with bankers and foreign investors to strengthen America's gold reserves and purchased $65 million in 30-year gold bonds, backed by 3.5 million ounces of gold, without Congress's approval. This revived the economy. John's team quickly bought out all the gold bonds in 22 minutes, calming the volatile financial markets and making him a hero. However, some questioned whether his actions were solely profit-motivated. Despite scrutiny, John's political influence remained intact due to generous donations to the Republican nominee, allowing him to continue operating at the top of the financial world. In 1907, the American economy faced a severe financial crisis, and John intervened to prevent bank failures. The government directed bank tellers to slow down counting money to reduce the rate of cash withdrawals, which could have catastrophic consequences. During the 1907 financial crisis, President Roosevelt and financier John worked together to prevent a possible depression. They called upon J.P. Morgan to gather influential leaders in finance at John's private library, where they discussed the best course of action to save the country. John advised fellow leaders to invest in smaller competitors to stabilize the market and prevent a domino effect of bankruptcy. He deposited money into several banks to prevent them from collapsing and locked the door during the meeting until a resolution was reached. Despite being sick, John convinced powerful bankers to agree to his plan during the 1907 financial crisis. The plan injected much-needed capital back into the economy, but also highlighted the nation's dependence on one man. The night is remembered as a pivotal moment in American history. John, as one of the most influential bankers, was called to testify before the Peugeot Committee, which was investigating the power and influence of the Wall Street Money Trust in the American economy. The The committee's work signaled a shift in public opinion as people became more wary of the concentrated power held by a few businessmen, and the era of the robber baron began to come to a close. After appearing before the Pujo Committee, John's image became synonymous with Wall Street power, leading to negative publicity. This caused his mental state to deteriorate, resulting in multiple nervous breakdowns. After John's death, his son took over the family business, which has since undergone numerous mergers and acquisitions, including with Bank One, Bear Stearns, and most significantly, Chase Bank in 2000, creating JP Morgan Chase, now the world's largest bank by market capitalization with $3 trillion in assets. Despite concerns over its overwhelming power, John's legacy lives on in the success of the bank. But when it comes to the era of these industrialists, I must say that the story of Cornelius Vanderbilt is my favorite. He was truly a one-of-a-kind individual. If you haven't had the chance to learn about his ruthless climb to success, I highly recommend checking out this video right here. Join me there in a moment, and let's delve into his story together. Cheers.